So this morning's program will be similar to yesterday evening. We are opening the speaking portion with Lorne Fitch, and following his presentation we'll have a chance once again to discuss our thoughts, our responses, and over sticky buttons. So Lorne Fitch is an award-winning biologist and Adjunct Professor with the University of Calgary. Lorne is internationally recognized as a communicator and is the Provincial Riparian Specialist for the Alberta Cows and Fish Program. Please join me in welcoming him.
The kitchen appliance salesman was having a slow day, so he decided to make a few cold calls. The first call, a little boy answered, and the salesman said, "Young man, can I speak to your mother?" And the little boy said, "She's busy." The salesman said, "Well, can I speak to your father then?" The little boy said, "He's busy too." "Well, are there any other adults in the house?" "Yes." "Well, who's there?" "Two firemen." "Can I speak to them?" "No, they're busy." "Anybody else there?" "There's a policeman." "Can I speak to him?" "No, he's busy." "My goodness, young man, there's a lot of people at your house. What are they doing?" "They're looking for me." Well, I guess the segue is we're all looking for some answers. I must admit, I don't know much about fracking, although I'm really thankful to the two speakers last night who helped immensely in framing some of the conversation. And I also presume that there are many in this room that know more about this technology than I do, about its application, about its benefits, and also its pitfalls. I do admit I feel a bit like Chevy Chase, the actor who gave a press conference at the 30th anniversary of Earth Day. He admitted that he knew very little more than the family dog about the environment, but at least he said, "I can do a bit more than bark about it." So this is a conversation that brings together experts and those who wish they were on a subject of some controversy. It's been 50 years to this year, that Rachel Carson penned her classic book, Silent Spring, and alerted us to the risks and uncertainties of industrial and agricultural chemicals in our lives. The response of industry, and to a degree government, to Carson's expose was predictable, unsurprising, and unhelpful. Deborah Davis, in her 2002 book, When Smoke Ran Like Water, chronicles the corporate war against truth in the public interest, the deception and obfuscation over environmental pollution on issues like lead in gasoline, CFCs, and the impact on the ozone layer, and a surfeit of other industrial chemicals with links to cancer. There seems to be a timeless, and I would say tiring quality to the debates over issues that affect us. A lack of scrutiny, transparency, and objectivity, coupled with a fog of misinformation or no information, does not aid our comfort that regulators, politicians, and industry have our best interests and our safety at heart. Perhaps fracking, the process of applying extreme pressure to a structure to improve flow, is the perfect metaphor for the conversation we should be having, that we need to have, about a process that creates a lot of anxiety, worry, and suspicion. And I think the fact that there's this many people in this room as there is an indication that this is an item of some interest. The thing about fracking, the important thing about fracking, is that it isn't just about fracking. And I think our two speakers last night helped us frame some of those things in terms of some of the ancillary concerns about the oil and gas industry that transcend just the process of fracking. We think we need more technological prowess, but what may be even more important is the ability to weigh its consequences. The 11th rule of physics is that you can't go faster than the speed of light. This parallels the first rule of human dynamics, which states you shouldn't go faster than the speed of enlightenment. We might find some momentary wisdom in the words of Douglas Adams in his novel A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He said, for instance, on the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was more intelligent than dolphins because he had achieved so much. The wheel, New York, wars, and so on. Whilst all the dolphins had ever done was muck about in the water having a good time. But conversely, the dolphins had always believed that they were more intelligent than man for precisely the same reasons. Like many of you, I often fly on commercial airlines. I board the aircraft, dutifully snap the buckle on my seatbelt snug, and then I listen and I'm aware of the safety lesson, or lecture, which is chanted almost by rote and is largely delivered without enthusiasm or a sense of anxiety. That's especially if you travel on Air Canada. It is charitably a perfunctory bit of due diligence with a box ticked off somewhere in some corporate headquarters that we were warned, and if we didn't heed the warning, well, it's on our heads. The impression we passengers are left with is that we're in good hands. The safety briefing and the fold-out safety card in the seat pocket are salvation in terms of whether an emergency happens. My cynical side ponders how well my seatbelt will protect me as a 55-ton Boeing 737 plummets to Earth, obeying the immutable law of gravity. There's not much to read on the safety card. I assume that's by design as a quick scan on that plunge to Earth amid the screams of my fellow passengers engaged in less calm endeavors. But no one around me appears pale or anxious, indicating that we're all cushioned by the illusion of safety, buoyed up by air traffic statistics, the standards of routine inspections, and the experience of our pilots. None of us have concluded our lives are inexorably governed by the laws of probability and confounded by chaos theory. I'm pretty sure I'll survive, based on past experience and the blind faith that has most of us believing we'll win the lottery but never be involved in a car accident. Around me are like-minded people who read and chat and sleep. All of us are passengers in a tube hurtling along at 30,000 feet above the landscape at 600 miles an hour. Somewhere out there in those immense skies are other tubes filled with people, hopefully not on an intersecting course with ours. I'm sure the pilots are monitoring the other traffic, but we passengers are blissfully ignorant about our fellow travelers and have little concern about them. They're on their own. They've had their own safety briefings. Some of them may be on flights that still serve meals. I try not to think of those perks. When we all arrive safely at a destination of our choice, we disembark, and all of us from different tubes mingle around the luggage carousel with the promise that our bags have arrived as well. We make little involuntary sighs of relief or often silent prayers of thanks for being back on Earth's surface. But on the ground, it isn't much different. We're still passengers on a liner, hurtling through the cosmos. All the same, except there's no safety briefing. No pert flight attendant telling us to keep our seatbelts fastened, not to smoke in the lavatory, and to keep the cell phones turned off so they don't affect navigation. Maybe there shouldn't be a safety briefing when we return to Earth. It might make more sense that the than the perfunctory one we get when we climb into a tube to leave the Earth's surface. What could we include in that safety briefing for the planet we ride on before we head home, luggage safely stored under our arms? Well, how about these things? Learn more about the craft we're riding on. Read all the manuals. Consider the limited carrying capacity of this vehicle. Don't lose any of the pieces. There aren't any replacement parts. If you make a mess, clean it up. Otherwise, we all sit in it. Air, water, soil, and biodiversity fuel this ship. Don't screw with the fuel. Regular inspections and timely maintenance will keep the craft functioning. Share the resources aboard the ship equitably. Once on, you can't get off. It's a one-way trip. Keep the heat down. Some parts of the craft are temperature sensitive. Limit your luggage. Remind yourself what do you really need. And remember, after you're gone, others will be riding on this craft. Leave it nice for them. So many of you are no doubt wondering where I'm going with this very global, very planetary, maybe even galactic line of thinking. We're not on a ride, all of us in this room together at this conference in a province called Alberta, talking about fracking, and more to the point, about water. So please fasten your seatbelts. Perhaps it would be useful to start with some fundamental principles that form what I call the mighty truths governing our approach to the world, to watersheds, and to the activities that go on in watersheds. They're very simple, and I'm going to be going over them in more detail. There are 5 of them. What goes around comes around. Everything is connected. Everything is additive. Diversity equals stability. And we humans are in the loop. These 5 principles underpin everything. They are integrative, unifying, and stand as a group to provide order to our thought processes as we try and grasp the complexity of the tasks in front of us. Understanding them does not mean we are granted immunity from their actions. Neither fighting the principles or ignoring them is an option. You might be able to bargain for short-term relief, but over time, acceptance is the only option. So let's explore them in a bit more detail. What goes around comes around isn't just a cliche. It's an instructive bit of advice. It could be restated as you either get the future you planned for or the one that wasn't planned for, which might explain the something for nothing, unplanned, ad hoc approach to land and water use which has led us to today's many challenges. It can describe the choices before us for a watershed plan, decisions on land use, or using herbicide on your lawn. Do you want to lead the process, providing critical direction? Do you want to follow it in the hope that it meets your needs? Or do you want to be dragged into the result after all the decisions are made? The principle would be a measure of the collective will of communities, of industry, of government, of us, to work in the broad public interest for the protection of water. Everything is connected. It speaks to an observation of John Muir, who said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. We have created a need to remove the barriers and silos to allow a systems approach to land, air, water, resource allocation, and land use. Challenging as it might be, we have to reduce the tendency to work in isolation, separating land from water, fish from timber, subsurface resources from surface ones, agriculture from air, and so on. In this sense, the challenge is to connect the dots between surface water supplies and the often integral but poorly understood subsurface water resources. Our province represents a community of interests, often coincidentally who share watersheds and groundwater with each other as we share them with our neighbors. Everything is additive, speaks to thresholds and limits. Some personal, like whether or not to have that second dessert or an additional drink. The science of cumulative effects analysis has progressed to provide us a reasonable interpretation of overlaps, what the future trajectories are, given the growth rates of today, and the signals to determine when to stop. For groundwater, a compelling issue is our lack of understanding where it is, how much there is, how it moves, and what are the current parameters of water chemistry. Measurements only have value if we have a starting point, a threshold. Coupled with information that helps us see the results of stressors, the concept of a line in the sand becomes less theoretical and more tangible. These tools will only help us if we use them. It is counterproductive to ignore the past footprint of land use and begin as if it doesn't exist. Diversity equals stability isn't just an ecological construct. Diverse systems are inherently more resilient, stable, and resistant to perturbations. The principle applies to a stream bank, a forest, a business, and to a community. I understand that to succeed in business, you need to identify your particular assets and leverage them to create your own competitive advantage. Alberta's competitive advantage isn't solely vested in barley, beef, oil, or dimensional lumber. It is our clean air, water, productive soil, and biodiversity, and the associated ecological goods and services, coupled with an educated and healthy population that provides our strengths. Once we lose those foundations, our advantage is gone. We humans are in the loop. Let me incite you with a startling statement. Let's not kid ourselves that we manage the environment or watersheds. It's impossible to send a fish to a course on how to swim better in less water, or a cow to a workshop on sustainable grazing, or persuade water to avoid being contaminated. Less startling, but not fully understood, is that we are not immune from the effects of our own actions. Nothing happens in environmental management until people agree to behave in ways that recognize the effects of their actions. With recognition comes responsibility. With responsibility eventually comes accountability. We then arrive at watershed management and protection of source water with attitude shifts and with changes in our decisions about how we live and how we make a living. Once we've understood, once we've digested those mighty truths and the implication for us, it might help us to focus on the discussion about fracking. There are threads that naturally run through debates over these polarized issues. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it does provide a starting point for many of the essential conversations that I think we need to have, whether it's fracking or some of the other polarizing issues in our communities. This isn't an exhaustive list, but first of all, there are some problems that cannot be fixed later on, no matter how much money or technological advancement we might have accumulated in the meantime. This is the recognition that the genie is out of the bottle and it cannot be forced back in. Second, the risks of irrevocable, irreparable damage are sometimes too great to wait and to fiddle and to wait for the proof of certainty. This is the classic doomsday experiment where the proof becomes irrelevant because the subject is already destroyed. Third, today's uncertainty can escalate to tomorrow's risk and a future crisis when no attempt is made to intervene early. Once an issue becomes evident, stopping and applying remedial action is a better course than the delaying tactic of calling for more The alternative to this would be the don't worry, be happy approach. The next one is simply because there are scientific uncertainties is not justification or an excuse to do nothing or to keep doing something that later will be problematic. Indication of harm, not proof of harm, should be the guiding principle for decision makers and regulators. Rather than putting the onus on a proponent to prove an activity is safe, there is a perceptible and unfair shift to affected parties to prove it isn't. Scientific difficulties are complicated and added to by a stream of disinformation fueled by short-term economic interests of those who would profit by keeping matters unresolved. There can be a stream of denial on the issue, on the risk and on the effects. Thomas Homer Dixon describes this starting with existential denial, where it is emphatically stated that the problem does not exist. If the weight of evidence mounts, it morphs into consequential denial, where the problem is acknowledged, but the answer is it really doesn't matter, or it's insignificant, or we can easily adjust to its effects. If the problem's existence and consequences cannot be ignored, there is a lapse into fatalistic denial. We can't do anything about it anyway. And then lastly, those who create the problem are most often not those that have to live with the problem, adjust to its effects, and face a variety of economic, health, social, and ecological challenges. So, in the essential conversations that hopefully will happen today and afterwards, we need to have these, and we need to begin by separating faith-based approaches from results or evidence-based forms of management. Many of us, and not just scientists, have cast our faith not in magic, not in a higher power, not in wishing, but in the power of double-blind testing, objective, independent, and ethical science. So it would be helpful to have the empirical evidence on fracking that provides clarity on effects on ground and surface water. That would help us understand risk and uncertainty. And there's probably a need to separate these two. Risk is associated with something going badly wrong. Uncertainty involves outcomes of any kind. A better understanding of the technology and its application would be part of risk assessment. In his book, Flirting with Disaster, Mark Gerstein points out that contrary to the belief of many non-technical people, most technology is unruly. That is, the servant of technology is not always well behaved, understood, or applied, even by its designers, let alone by its users. Designers and users might not understand all of the conditions that cause radical changes in performance, nor do they fully appreciate the reactions amongst components they have not had the opportunity to observe. This unfamiliarity is especially prevalent with emerging technologies that haven't had time to accumulate a substantial body of experience through use in varied conditions and in complex arenas that possess potential interactions that can't be or haven't been exhaustively tested. In both design and circumstances, contemporary systems involve a bewildering array and blend of people, expectations, experience ranges, technology, and idiosyncratic events. Failures arise from the interaction of elements. Increasing the reliability of the parts will not necessarily remedy the vulnerability of the whole. Ordinary accidents, failures, and problems are more complex than they seem. Human error is often always the blame, and even though it's a factor and it can't be discounted, but however, contributing factors, especially design and uncertainties involved with applying a technology in a wide variety of circumstances, magnify the risk. On another front, dangers arise when regulators and watchdogs develop financial and political ties to the entities they are supposed to be regulating and watching. When the politicians and the bureaucracy see an entity as a client, it encourages the perspective that they need to please rather than to regulate the industry. In Alberta, it is doubtful whether anyone would call the government a disinterested, objective, and neutral party in discussions over the petroleum industry. Many would contend the Alberta government has ceded its role as an arbiter by being a less than honest broker of information. A scientist isn't a person who gives you the right answers. He's the one that asks the right questions. So to end this fractured conversation over fracking, you might have to take on the mantle of asking the right questions. Ironically, I think, they are not necessarily ones of a technical nature. I'll sketch some of them for you as a start. What is safe? Who says it's so? Who determines it to be safe? And who accepts the risk? Upon what foundation of empirical evidence does the threshold for safety and risk sit? In making decisions on safety and risk, what are the time horizons? What are the acceptable, effective remedies for problems related to fracking, and will they be useful in real time? How do fracking and the public interest intersect? How is water, either surface or groundwater, prioritized in decisions about activities related to the exploration, development, and transport of oil and gas? What is the track record of industry to date? What short and long-term commitments can industry provide to ensure other resource values, like water, remain unaffected? Is there an acceptable level of transparency in industry and landowner settlements where issues may have occurred? What role does government have in the public interest to ensure there is transparency? These are big questions, maybe intractable ones, but necessary ones with which to grapple. Here's another fundamental question. How many of you have children? How many of you are contemplating having children in the future? How many of you associate with the children of others? Or think children are our future? If you remain unmoved at this point, were you a child in the past? Secure in the knowledge or notion that adults are operating with your best interests at heart. I hope I've achieved some level of solidarity amongst you on the subject of responsibility for future generations. To take on that responsibility, to ground it for watersheds and water, might start by contemplating what you would write in a letter to those that follow us. It could be to your grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, or the descendants of others. It's a letter to the future. This is what I would write. This is to my grandnephew and grandniece, and hundreds of others I have never met. As I write this to you today, I realize it may be a while before you will be able to read. You may not yet be born. In fact, your parents may not yet be born. But as I think and plan for the world that you will occupy, especially for the water that will sustain you, I want to keep you in mind. I want you to be top of mind in my thoughts. Considering water, I am not so much bequeathing it to you as I am thinking about how my use of it now will affect you at a time down the road. As I write this, I share the initiative of planning your future with many. Some of us have lived here for hundreds of generations. Many of us are new to the landscape. While we hope and dream of what your future will be, we realize that whatever opportunities you have for employment, security, stability, and health will largely be determined by our activities of today. I think I can speak for all of my fellow watershed residents and others when when I say we want you to be happy. I'm unconvinced, though, that happiness is related to the acquisition of more stuff. A healthy economy allows us to buy stuff, but a healthy environment ensures there is stuff to be bought. Without a healthy, stable, and diverse environment, the economy falters, stumbles, and we fall into survival mode. We can't buy ourselves out of that position. We want you to find employment, good jobs, jobs that will keep you here, but we also want to ensure that you not only make a living, you make a life. Life revolves around family, community, recreation, responsibility, and health, not just a job. We are just now beginning to appreciate that a healthy landscape, complete with clean water, supports healthy people. Perhaps that realization will be more ingrained in your time. To me, the measure of a healthy landscape includes water clean enough to drink, air pure enough that breathing it isn't an article of faith, productive soil to raise food and other valuable commodities, the natural expression of biodiversity, and ecological integrity within the influence of a relatively benign climate. If the quality of these things becomes our measure of how we make a living, from all of the things that we now do in a watershed, including farming, extracting oil and gas, timber harvest, you will have a great life. I'm not sure that you'll be able to appreciate how hard it is to do this now, to slow down, to save, to conserve when the opportunity seems so pressing. Someone wise said the ultimate test of a man's conscience may be his willingness to sacrifice something today for future generations whose words of thanks will not be heard. We aren't looking for thanks. It's our responsibility to do this, to leave you a landscape with that possibility. Our bottom line is that evolution didn't set itself on a course for humans to have us end up with large investment portfolios, starter castles, and adult toys. No, its purpose is to ensure the species continues and passes on the inheritable traits that serve the next generation well. So as we think and plan, we ponder what will serve you well. It would seem to me the two most important gifts we can give you are the ability to use information to make wise decisions and a quality environment in which there are still choices left to be made. My fondest regards, Lorne. Write your own letter. Write it with others if you can. Take off the hats you wear that represent the interests of today and think about those that don't have a voice about the future, especially those yet to be born. Imagine if all Albertans were motivated to write a similar letter about their vision for tomorrow. If we could do this simple task, either collectively or individually, you might find that the immensity, complexity, and contention of the task inherent in protecting water becomes more manageable. It is said, with our addiction to petroleum, we would rather drive than breathe. Turning that old saying around a bit, hitting an issue like fracking, we could say we would rather drive than drink. Because of that, I think the last word should go to Rachel Carson, who perhaps envisioned the world of today when she said, "In an age when man has forgotten his origins and is blind to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become a victim of his indifference." I'm with Rachel Carson. We can't afford to be indifferent about water. This conversation that you are embarking on is important, pivotal, and timely.
probably haven't seen, but I see some people in the background spraying. I hope it's the sticky buttons. So maybe if one of our students can go check and always consider the sticky buttons to be the most important part of the day. So